We are here today at White House City Hall with Darwin Bennett, who has some very interesting stories to tell about his time here in the White Lake area. My name is Tanya Kabala. Oscar Osbo is handling the video, and the interview is being done as part of the White Lake Environmental History Project. And do want to ask you, Darwin, first, have you read and signed the interview release form?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to just ask you to start by just telling a little bit about, a little bit about first who you are, and then second, what's your relationship to the White Lake area and the pollution issues that we've had.
Okay. I came here in 1973, and I had been in the newspaper business for about 15 years prior to that. I worked on small weekly newspapers and worked my way up to a full-time job with the Detroit News. I'd worked there from 69 to 73, and then I got a chance to buy my own newspaper. Well, you got to understand, living over in Detroit, I mean, the Detroit River is not known to be the pristine river that it was 300 years ago when the voyagers and other people came through the area. And I come over here, I think I had this grand idea about coming over to God's country because I figured it's beautiful, look at that water, it's clean, and never in my wildest imaginations did I think I'd run into something like pollution over here. Detroit, yes. I can remember looking at the Detroit River near my house in Gibraltar, and I couldn't look more than 2 or 3 inches down into the water. And that did not make you feel very good about getting fish out of there. I know you used to go fishing, but then we'd throw the fish away. I came here with my wife and children, and we bought 2 newspapers. It'd be the Montague Observer and Karsten Press. We put them together and formed a newspaper called the White Lake Observer. A year later, the Whitehall Interurban wanted me to buy them out, so we bought that newspaper. So the result of that was a paper called the White Laker Observer. It went to 2 cities here and about 16 townships. It was an area newspaper covering 2 counties, both northern Muskegon and Oceana. And I'd been here a good maybe 4 years before I realized that we had some kind of a problem. And I started to hear a few rumbles about it.
Darwin, can I interrupt you just a minute?
Sure.
Can you talk at all about, because we'll get to the pollution issues, but can you talk at all about what it was like to, be the owner of a weekly paper during those times? What was your role? What was your responsibility?
Well, I likened our responsibility, I say our responsibility in newspaper, was to be a mirror to the community. Well, what we were in a position of doing was not telling the community what was wrong, is we were just holding up a mirror saying, this is what's going on here. Not everybody liked that because they don't, you might know the truth, but you may not like it. And in this case, when we started printing a few stories about possible pollution in White Lake by Hooker, who was a subsidiary of Occidental Petroleum, one of the world's 5th largest corporations, that didn't seem to go too well with some of the people in town and some of the politicians and specifically some of the plant officials.
Now, when you came to the White Lake area,
right.
what were some of your first, what are some of your first memories or reaction? I mean, especially coming from the east side of the state.
My wife and I, we walked out to Lake Michigan, and we took our dog with us and the kids, and we saw that beautiful lake, and we knew that this is where we wanted to live, and it was beautiful, and it was like I had dreams of living happily ever after in a wonderful community like this. There was never any thoughts in my mind about possible pollution. Where? You could see anything, and that's the trouble with some of the type of pollution we're talking about. You can't see it. In many cases, it's buried or it's down in the water, and it may be years before it's taken out of.
What were people in the community like, the downtowns and things like that? I mean, what was it?
They were very friendly. When I came in here, nobody here knew me from Adam. Just a young guy and his wife and family, and from Detroit. And I think the tendency was, and that was good, to turn out. I know we had an open house at the newspaper. Our newspaper is very small, little office, but we had people in all day long, and they really made me feel welcome. Never did I think that we were not wanted or that we were under the gun. We were thrilled.
So did you, what size staff did you have?
We had a gal Friday, Lois Matthews, and her sister, Gloria Raschke, and that was it. And my wife, at that time, was not involved in the daily operation of the plant. She was a stay-at-home mother with 2 small children, and she had been a teacher, but she had no newspaper experience. So pretty much it was me and the 2 ladies.
Who did the majority of the writing?
I did. Gloria did some wedding stories, although I filled in for her when she was on vacation. That was always interesting. And Lois was my bookkeeper and office manager, and sometimes even surrogate mother. She watched out over me and my family and was a wonderful worker.
What kind of a role did you think I mean, this was a time when there were more weekly papers in communities.
True.
And, you know, was it the place where people got most of their news?
Well, you got to remember we had a competing newspaper, which was the Lakeshore Interurban. They got the 2 weekly newspapers, and obviously the Muskegon Chronicle. And at that time, I think maybe Channel 13 covered this area quite a lot.
So there were a number of news sources.
Yes, and we basically were what I would call the Boy Scout news, the Girl Scout news, the church news. One of the first things I did when I got here, and I had done this with other newspapers, I departmentalized the newspaper. A lot of small newspapers, what they do is they take the news and they just put it in wherever it fits. Well, I had sports sections, I had society pages, I had general news pages, I had an editorial page, I had a classified area, and I know I had people come to me soon after I got here, and they said, Darwin, I don't know what you've done to the newspaper, but we're really pleased with how it looks. And got to remember, in those days, we were so small, we had, about 20 pages, but then I discovered a way of getting bigger circulation by going free to all the homes, but in order to do that, I had to run a 24-page paper, a larger paper. Larger paper means more money. More money means a need for more advertising. So that's where our impetus came for enlarging the newspaper.
Just so you can get out to circulation, more
Right.
circulation. Can I ask you what was your interest in having your own paper?
Well, as a young boy, this sounds probably typical maybe of a lot of writers, but I used to read a lot, and also write a lot of poetry at home. And I knew I wanted to be a writer, but you see the trouble with any kind of a writer, unless you're Steinbeck, you're probably not going to make a living at your writing. So you need a income job too. And I figured the closest thing I could get to an income job would be as a feature writer or something like that. So I started out working in the college paper, the State News, from 55 to 60, and I learned probably a great deal of my information about how to run a newspaper from working on that. And but then I still didn't have a job with the daily newspaper until First job was 63 or 64, and I quit my job with the State Highway Department after 11 years with civil service and seniority, and went up north to Tawas, Michigan to take a job for, I think it was $200 a week. I don't think it was even that much. But anyway, it wasn't a lot of money. But the money wasn't the thing anyway. I wanted the job, and I became editor of the Iosco County News and the Iosco Press. There was 2 newspapers, and I did that for a short time, and about 8 months later, I got an offer to go down around Detroit with the Wyandotte News Herald, which is a free circulation newspaper in Wyandotte, working for a man named Frank Beaumont, who was a big exponent of free newspapers in the Michigan area.
Now, did you work for the Detroit News?
Yes, but that was later. That was a good, 69 when I went to work for the Detroit News. I worked 5 years for Frank Beaumont and Wyandotte News Herald, and I was, he came to me one day and said, Darwin, he says, I've just bought another newspaper. He says, I would like to run it. I said, well, why me? And he said, well, I think you got the right type of personality, and let's just see what happens. So I started running the paper. It's called the Flat Rock Guardian. It was down below Detroit. And he came to me about 4 months later. He says, Darwin, I just been to the bank. He says, we're making money. You made money every week. He says, how do you do that? I said, well, isn't that what you wanted me to do? He says, yeah, but not everybody can do it, Darwin, and you are. He says, you're just a natural in the newspaper business, and I predict you'll go far. Well, whether I did or not, he sure made me feel good.
Well, what about, getting back to the White Lake area,
Sure.
When did you first hear, how did you first hear about pollution issues relating to White Lake?
I would like to say it was just a few articles in the paper, and I believe that would be true, but the big push came when I ran into one of my advertisers, Bill Clark, who ran Clark's Save-On store here in town. And Bill had worked also up in the Pinconning area, which was near Tawas. And so we kind of were kindred spirits, and we were new in the community. He said, Darwin, he said, I'd like to invite you to a business meeting I'm going to have in Whitehall. And he said, it's on some of the problems that we're dealing with here in the community, and I've got about 30 businessmen that would like to have you listen to some of the information that they've discovered. So I went over, and I sat down that night, and Wynn Dahlstrom, who was an environmental attorney here in town at the time, got up and made a presentation. And after, I believe after the presentation, right during the presentation, Wynn, who was never a shrinking violet, tried to pin me down by saying, well, now you have this information, Darwin. What are you going to do about it? Well, I believe, as I recall at the time, I said, well, I'm going to look into it. I'm going to find out as much information as I can. And I said, and then I'll decide what I'm going to do. But I'm not going to be stampeded into it. Well, he accepted that. And as it turned out, after several weeks of looking at different things and papers and proofs that he had, and I had to come to the conclusion that there was indeed a problem here, and it was a kind of problem that if there wasn't a citizens group involved, probably nothing would be done. And more importantly, if there wasn't a newspaper covering what was going on, there probably also wouldn't be anything done.
Can I ask you who some of the, now this is the first time that I've heard about a business group. Do you remember some of the other businesses?
There was no name.
Oh, okay.
There was no name. I don't think it even alluded to it as stop this or
But it was a
whatever.
group of business people?
Yes, correct.
Now, I had not heard in the past that there were business people who were that interested in it. What other businesses? Do you remember?
Well, there was Jim Tate. He was across the street and had a small gift shop. I can't remember all the different names, and I would say if you were going through the community and compared names, that you probably would have found that a lot of the old-time names, the more established people that had been here for years and years, probably were not on that list, and would have been newer business people, people who had moved in from other towns, and that were not afraid to speak their mind, and they weren't afraid to get involved, because I can assure you that one of the things I learned as a newspaper editor when I first starting out, that is you don't become overly emotionally involved in covering your community. You try to maintain a fair and balanced approach in your reporting. And if you do fall into another category, sometimes you endanger your livelihood.
What, had you heard anything about Hooker prior?
Not much.
Prior to this?
Not much.
And then, were you familiar with anyone like Bob Wesley or anybody else that was involved?
Wesley was from the old guard, and he preceded me, and he'd done a lot of work, but by the time I came to town, he actually had been starting to slow down a little bit. Okay. But there, yes, when I began to research it, I did run into that name. I'd never had a chance to talk with him personally too much, but it's funny because his boys who took over operating the marina, they approached me afterwards and told me one time, they came up to me, they said, we just want to tell you that our dad thinks you're doing a heck of a job, and they're glad that you've come along and taken up the campaign, because he needs all the help he can get. He said, we think that you're doing a hell of a good job.
So when you looked at the information, decided that it warranted attention, what did you do?
Well, we started carrying more and more stories about it. One of the first things I did was have a little conversation with the plant manager, Dwayne Copois, who was also a member of the White Lake, Montague Whitehall Rotary, of which I was the president. That particularly, it would be 77, 78 that I was president there. And I called him up one day on the phone. I said, Dwayne, I said, help me out here. I said, I've been getting a lot of rumblings about your plant and about the possible pollution of the lake. I said, do we have anything to worry about? He said, Darwin, he said, I can assure you, there's no problem, just relax, it's fine. Well, that wasn't true, as I was to find out. And I think I would have respected the man more if he'd have said, yes, we do have some problems, but if you'll work with me and we can have a dialogue and talk, and then you can give me a call now and then and ask me questions, we'll try to work it out. But he really stonewalled it and like, no, there's nothing going on. There's no problem.
So what kind of stories did you write?
Basically, they were things like the formation of this group that was looking into it. That got a lot of reaction, because then all the people, I would say, just take people like, say, that were in the real estate business. Now, real estate values are very often affected by anything that goes on in a community. And if there's possible pollution, what effect do you think that's going to have on maybe the house values and or business values? And I had questions like that being raised. Ben Bennett, no relation to me, I had several discussions. He was always a gentleman about it. Something I can't always say, which was true about some of the other people that were trying to pretend like everything was pure and pristine in White Lake.
Did you, what kind of information did you look at about the plant and its pollution?
Well, for one thing, Wint, who had done a lot of research on this. Anybody that ever met Wint had to come away impressed not only with how good an attorney he was, but how good a thorough researcher he was. And he had information, yeah, and he had information on things like what the plant was producing, what were the byproducts, what were things that were left in the water and the soil after the chemicals were used or destroyed or discarded. And some of the things that were left behind. Now, if you and I threw a bag of garbage out on the front lawn, maybe in a week or two it would rot, or the birds would come and take care of it. But with chemicals and the things that are left after the manufactured chemicals, those don't go away. If those go into the soil or into the water, it may take any place from 50 to 100 years before that water is pure enough to drink again, or that soil is good enough to grow food in, which after all goes into the food chain and eventually into our bodies.
Do you, what kind of comments did you get from people besides the real estate questions as you wrote the articles?
We got people that were saying, well, gee, Darwin, I see you're giving a lot of coverage to this. Are you, there's no one specifically that said this, but are you sure you know what you're doing, or why are you giving so much coverage to it? And, you might want to think about what effect that's going to have on your advertising. Are you going to lose some advertisers as a result of it? Later on, we actually got feedback from some of our advertisers that we were being approached, that the advertisers being approached by employees at the plant who were saying that they were considering a boycott of the newspaper if I didn't stop running stories about the pollution of the lake.
Oh, so they might boycott the advertiser?
The advertiser, and that in turn would affect my relationship, could affect my relationship with my advertisers if they were not all loyal to me, or they were concerned about people buying food there or not buying food there. And at that time, we had three grocery stores in town. It was a very competitive situation in those days. We had Plum's, we had Dell's, and help me, we had one more. I can't think of what the other one was.
IGA?
Well, that was Montague Foods. Okay, that's yeah. I think anyway. The point was there were three, and they were splitting up the advertising dollar about three ways, and I'm sure they would like to have gotten all of the money on the food. So
did you have positive comments from people who told they?
The positive comments were not readily available in the beginning, and I was prepared for that. I was prepared for the long haul. I didn't think that this was something that was going to solve itself in a day or a week or a month. I knew that there was going to have to be some thorough investigation into it and some thorough reporting, and it had to be good and it had to be accurate.
Now, was it a hard decision to take the path that you took?
Whenever I ran a newspaper for other people, I had a definite formula of how to run a newspaper. I didn't walk into it as a young reporter. I had some experience, and very basic, one of the things that you always tried to stay away from was real controversial subjects, because very frankly, they could get people madder than hell at you for one reason or another, and then they might not read the paper, or they might not advertise. And so I always had tried to keep a balanced approach. In this case, after thorough research into what was going on, I felt that we had to do a campaign, if you will, against the company. And I felt no remorse about it. In fact, I knew that by doing so, it might cost me eventually in the long run, which it eventually did. But I went ahead and did it anyway because I knew it was the right thing to do, and it's what a newspaper should be doing in a community.
What was your viewpoint of, I would say, maybe community leaders during the time, like mayors or people at the social leaders?
Most of them were hanging back. Most of them were doing what most politicians do, local or state or otherwise national. They weren't getting too involved in it. It was a little disheartening, but I felt that I was on safe ground. I would say that what really broke the logjam was when Norm Almond first came out with, and this was separate from me, he came out with several comments in the paper about maybe we should be looking into this more, that there was something there, and it was going to affect both communities, not just Montague, not just Whitehall, not just White River Township, not just Fruitland Township. I mean, it affected the whole area, and that it was something that we had to be realistic and look into it, whether we wanted to or not. It called for a thorough checking.
Now, was this when Norm was mayor of Whitehall?
I believe he was a councilman at the time.
Okay.
It was before he became mayor.
Well,
And it surprised me when he did, because before then we never had any conversations, and I had never had any indication of exactly how he felt. I'd been covering both the Montague and Whitehall councils, and so I was privy to some of their reaction to similar things.
What was your viewpoint of government, maybe state or federal government, in relation to the pollution issues in White Lake?
Well, you got to understand, I used to be a reporter in Detroit, and we covered pollution there, so it was not the first time I covered pollution. Well, basically there, things got done, but very slowly. And you don't undo pollution of years and years and years, and don't do it overnight. They're still cleaning up the Detroit River now, and they started about 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when they started putting push on there. And you can actually go there and look down into the water now and see a foot or two.
Do you, can you tell me about the column you wrote about Warren Dobson, who he resigned, he left his position at Hooker Chemical and alerted, state authorities to the problem?
Well, I would like to talk about that, but there was one thing I wrote about before I wrote about Warren that I think might have been more important.
What's that?
And that was the problem I was dealing with getting pressure from advertisers, pressure from readers, feedback from Dwayne out at the plant. People didn't like the articles about the pollution. So I didn't know what else to do, and I was doing a little soul searching, and I got up one night in the middle of the night because it was a lot of it was on my mind. And after all, my business was hanging in the balance too, and my children's future, and my grandchildren's future. I sat down and I wrote a column in which I explained to the readers that starting from that particular issue and all the articles in the future, that I would not be publishing any news about pollution in White Lake because people didn't want to read about things like that. It upset them. It bothered them. And I said, well, I would like to print more stories about this, but my name is neither Woodward or Bernstein, and I'm not a big city reporter, and I don't have a lot of pull. And so you'll find an article, you'll find a box on the front page of my newspaper where the stories about Hooker and the pollution, possible pollution of the lake, would have been. But they're not in there this week because people don't want me to write about this. Well, I got a lot of reaction from that. And I get a lot of people saying, no, you misunderstand, Darwin. We don't want you to stop writing about it, but make sure you're right about what you're writing about. show us proof, give us all the information you can. If anything, we want you to write more about it. Now, I don't think that Hooker was too pleased by that either.
Did you mention pressure on your advertisers?
Oh, yes, that's in there. But I thought that they used all the finesse of Genghis Khan when they started putting pressure on the people in the community, because the average small person, your next door neighbor, your brother, your sister, they're not equipped to handle political situations like that. As a large daily newspaper, I've walked through picket lines. I've covered murders. I've covered situations where you have to keep your wits about you. And I assure you, you don't have room for any wimp. So when it came to dealing with something like pollution of the lake, I didn't have any trouble handling that.
So you continued to write articles after that?
After that, I got a lot more help from the community. I found out that as I recall, the chamber even came out and started running some articles about they too were naturally concerned about the pollution of the lake. I don't think it was an easy choice. I think that there was a lot of discussion on the board about that before they came out with a statement about that. But I think that they felt like they had to at least appear to be looking into this. This was about the same time that Carol Wood became a director of the Chamber of Commerce, and I think she was very helpful in keeping an open mind about we might have a problem here in town.
Do you, what did your feelings about the companies change over time? I mean, I'm guessing that you initially...
Yes, it got more distrustful. And if anybody ever questioned me about, well, are you ever sorry you ever started all this way back when? The only thing I'm sorry is I didn't start sooner, it didn't start harder, and I didn't fight with more gusto than I did, because I was a reluctant warrior in the beginning. I had to be shown, and I had to be proven, and there was never a time that I doubted Wint Dahlstrom or the information that he provided us, and he was very instrumental in getting all the information. We even had Hal Adamkus, who was the environmental director for Region 5 in Chicago, come up here. I remember...
The Environmental Protection Agency.
Yes, and he came up, he had an open meeting here, and we had people come to that, and I had a chance to sit down and talk with him afterwards. And I said, Hal, why hasn't there been more activity in your area? He says, well, you got to consider, he says, this is kind of a political football, and there are problems both ways. And he says, I'm trying to do the best I can. He says, frankly, he says, I believe exactly what you're doing is the right thing. He says, but I still have bosses in Washington that I have to deal with. I'm doing all I can. I can promise you all the help I can try to give you.
So what was the, how did you end up leaving the area?
Well, you mentioned this other column about Warren Dobson, and that actually came later, because you got to understand there was a lot of pressure on everybody. It wasn't just on me, it wasn't just on my employees, it wasn't just on the store employees of the different advertisers, the people in town, city officials, councilmen, everybody was talking. There wasn't a day went by in a coffee shop that you wouldn't see 3 or 4 people sitting around, and they were talking about the pollution of White Lake. Well, we'd been covering that for quite a while, and I found out that was about the time that Warren stepped forward as a whistleblower, and I believe he contacted Wint, and he said, not only can I prove that Hooker has been polluting, but I can tell you where and show you the places that things are buried. Well, he did, and of course you can imagine how that affected the community. Uh, I got talking with him one day, and I found out that he had been fired from his job, which I guess is not surprising. Whistleblowers often face that same dilemma. And I also found out, in order to feed his family, that he had been forced to go hunting in the woods. He had about 8 children, as I recall at the time. He says, Darwin, he says, I hunt deer all year round. He says, I have to feed my family. He says, I do not go to any charitable organizations for help. I'm doing this all by myself, and I'm doing it with a very small amount of money. And if I have to poach in order to survive, he says, I will do it. Well, I printed a column on that, and without mentioning the name, well, the very next morning after that column came out, I had 2 DNR officers standing at my front counter demanding to know the name of the person who was poaching in our community. Of course, I wouldn't tell them. Nothing ever happened. Warren later, I think he died several years later, and
Well,
I think
he left town and then.
Yeah.
But he died maybe about 15 years ago after he returned.
But he never, how do I put it? I don't think he received the reward he expected for alerting the community to a very dangerous problem in their community.
Did he, did he expect a different reaction, you think?
Warren was not a well-educated man, and he was doing this, I think, because it was an emotional response to a stressful situation, and he felt it was the right thing to do. But I don't feel that he was treated well. I don't feel he was treated fairly. And if you look at, examine this nation's whistleblowers over the last 20, 30 years, many people face the same dilemma. Once they've done that, it's hard for them to go back and achieve any kind of happiness in the local community.
Do you, are you familiar, well, first of all, let me ask you,
Yeah.
Are there any other stories of that time that you would like to share?
People always ask, well, look, you were getting threats, but nothing serious happened. All I know is that I started pulling the drapes on my picture window of my house. I was concerned for my family. There had been threats made against a couple of people. One man was, one of the businessmen was knocked down in a parking lot, supposedly accidentally, but from the descriptions he gave, it didn't sound accidental to me. You got to realize that when you're talking about people's businesses, you're talking about their livelihood, they're talking about their life. They're not talking about going out and buying a candy bar or something like that. It's a pretty serious issue. You get people that are very emotional. And if anything happened that one of the things that did happen that I didn't like was things got so divided that the people, the community was pretty well split right down the middle. Maybe not numerically, but in a general way. You were either for it or you were against it. There was no in between.
Did you have any conversations at all with workers?
Yes, I did. I was sitting at the Wayside Bar one day having a hamburger and a beer, and somebody came up and tapped me on the shoulder and they said, "Are you Darwin Bennett?" I said, "Yes." And the guy said, "Well, I work for Hooker Chemical." And he said, "I want you to know all those stories you're writing about and all that information about the pollution of White Lake and all the improper disposal of different things that shouldn't have been done that way." He says, "Well, you know what? You're right on. Everything like that you wrote about has been happening, And he says, I know because I worked there.
Did you hear workers who were defending the company?
Yes, but not, it would be, they would do so in more of a, yeah, my brother, like, yeah, my brother does do that type of thing, but I don't want to talk about it. They weren't friendly about it. You know what I mean? They might give you a dirty look and make some muttering, something underneath their breath or something like, probably telling me how good looking I was, something like that.
Well, I did want to ask,
Sure.
you now, I know you don't live in the area anymore, but do you have any knowledge as far as progress made at cleaning up White Lake?
They've had the purge wells going for quite a while. You're looking, I believe, just from memory, it seems to me like it was in the mid-'80s that they were directed by the EPA and other people to put in the purge wells. And those purge wells have been going, as I believe, continuously since then. The problem is that it's a hell of a lot easier to put pollution down in the soil than it is to take it out. A lot of times people don't realize, well, I can best describe it the way Win Dahlstrom used to do. He would take a map of the area and he'd show where all the chemical plants are located in Muskegon and White Lake and along through here. And he said, you notice one thing, this common denominator about all these things, Darwin? I said, what's that? He said, all these things are in land that's right close to the water. They're in land that's on sandy soil. He says, so what happens when you pour something onto that type of soil? It goes straight down into our aquifer, into our drinking water. And there have been similar pollution problems all along here through the Muskegon, Whitehall, White Lake, and Montague area. At this point, we're in a situation where if we do not become more educated, and I say we, I'm not talking about the newspaper editors. I'm not talking about the investigative reporters. I'm not talking about TV people who are trying to cover the story. I'm talking about the average person feels almost powerless in this situation. The best thing we can do is educate ourselves about what kind of companies are coming into our community, are the type of community, are they the type of businesses that we want in here? What is their background? What is their history on pollution? There was a book written by a man named Aldo Leopold called Sand Creek, or Sand
County Almanac.
Sand County Almanac, thank you, dear. The theory of his whole book was this: we will not continue to progress as a nation until we, meaning industry and businesses and the average citizens, develop a thing called land use ethics. We all just figure that we can take the land and use it. When we get that deed to the land, whether we're a homeowner or a business, we figure we can do anything we want to on that property. Well, that ain't true, nor should it be true. And we should have moral ethics, a written code of moral ethics. This is not me, this is all Leopold, and I agree with him completely. He wrote very eloquently about it in Sand Creek County. And it really needs to be done, but there hasn't been any follow-through. When these different writers were writing back when, Rachel Carlson, Silent Spring, she could see these things coming, and so could Aldo Leopold. Well, both of those people are gone, and now it's up to a new group of people. A lot of young people. I see some encouraging signs going on. I see a lot more young people involved with concern about environmental problems like the Enbridge thing with the oil spill. you can't just let people continue to get away with things like this and give them a little slap on the hand. When they came down on Hooker, they had them dead to rights. They had all the information they needed. Instead, they pled nolo contendere in federal court in Grand Rapids, which means no contest. But by doing so, they neither admitted their guilt or denied any wrongdoing. And at this point, I would have to say that by them closing the plant and raising the building, that they hope that in the future, if they wanted to, they might come back and start up again. I was out there the other day, I rode by on my bicycle, I noticed a sign that says something like Wildlife Habitat Council Land Preserve. What a crock. I'm sure they're getting some financial, what's the word I want to use, tax break for designating that land that way. The program, I believe, is overseen by a council, but if you check the council, I think you'll find that there are various scientists that have their names on that you might find have some prior association with Occidental or Hooker. This is a very common approach for the chemical industry. They try to sugarcoat it. They try to pretend it never happened. And the problem is it did, and it will continue to do so until people are more aware of it, and they, very frankly, prevent some of those companies from coming into their communities so they don't have these problems.
Well, I think we've covered almost everything.
I hope I haven't been too hard on everybody, but truth is the truth, and people don't like to hear the truth sometimes.
Well, I guess my last question is, have I missed anything as far as asking questions?
We could talk for many, many hours about this. There's so much to this story that even now, probably, we may never know. I think about the effect that it had on some of the people that had jobs there. When they went to work there at Hooker, I'm sure they envisioned working there the rest of their lives and getting pensions. Were there people that lost out on that? Probably there were. Were there people that ended up with having problems with lupus that live out along that road? Yes, there are. And I don't think it was accidental that they were located very close to Hooker Chemical and some of the polluted city wells. In spite of all this, I still feel that we are accomplishing something, that we are moving forward. I am intrigued by some of the investigative articles that I read about what other people are doing in other areas. There are stories down in the areas where they are low income and uneducated people in the southern states where large corporations, not just chemical industry, some of these large corporations, they go in there and they figure, well, we got the money, we got the power, we can do anything we want to. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that they're watching themselves very carefully. But in order to continue making improvement, I would urge people to educate themselves about things coming into the community. When those community leaders from White Lake invited Hooker and Occidental in here in 1955, those are good people. The people living here that talked to them, but they didn't have any reason to suspect that Hooker might have been fibbing to them or lying to them about how good a corporate neighbor they were going to be. It's unfortunate, but we need to be a little more skeptical, a little more probing in our questions about what that particular corporation's got to do for our community. We want progress, but we don't want progress with pollution.
Well, on that note, Darwin, I want to thank you for
Okay.
your time today,
Thank you.
and appreciate all you've done on behalf of White Lake, and appreciate your interview.
I appreciate your interview too. You take care.